The distant wail of a train whistle pierced the autumn air as Abigail Decker stood on the dusty platform of Fort Bridger, Wyoming, clutching her weathered carpet bag with white knuckles. Her 38th birthday had passed just 2 weeks prior, and here she was, starting over in a place where the mountains touched the sky and the horizon stretched beyond imagination. The year was 1882, and the West was still wild enough to both terrify and enthrall her. "Madam, you planning on standing there till winter?" The station master's gruff voice jolted her from her thoughts. Abigail straightened her shoulders beneath her navy traveling dress. "I'm looking for Widow Harmon's boarding house." The station master, an older man with a salt and pepper beard, pointed down the main street. "3 blocks that way, white house with blue trim. Can't miss it." With a grateful nod, Abigail gathered her belongings and stepped into the bustle of Fort Bridger. The town wasn't large by Eastern standards, but it hummed with activity: cowboys leading horses, women with baskets of goods, children darting between buildings, and the occasional well-dressed businessman making his way down the boardwalk. She had come west to work as the town's new schoolteacher, a position secured through correspondence after the death of her father had left her without means in Philadelphia. At 38, unmarried and alone, Abigail had faced limited options. The school board of Fort Bridger hadn't asked her age in their letters, and she hadn't volunteered the information. Widow Harmon's boarding house was exactly where the station master had indicated: a tidy 2-story structure with lace curtains and a swept porch. Abigail knocked on the door, and a plump woman with bright eyes and silver-streaked dark hair opened it. "Mrs. Harmon?" Abigail inquired. "Just rose to you, dear. You must be Miss Decker, our new schoolmarm." The widow's face crinkled into a warm smile. "Come in before you catch your death." Wyoming autumns turn brutal quick. The interior of the house was modest but clean, with polished floors and simple furnishings. The scent of baking bread and cinnamon filled the air. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the left," Rose said, leading the way. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. We've got indoor plumbing, which is more than most can say in these parts. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. Lunch is your own business." The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed, a pine dresser, and a window overlooking the street below. Abigail set down her carpet bag and removed her hat, feeling the tension of travel begin to ease from her shoulders. "School board's mighty pleased to have an educated Eastern lady teaching our young uns," Rose remarked, lingering in the doorway. "Our last teacher, Miss Perkins, up and married a cattle baron from Montana, left us high and dry mid-term." Abigail smiled, though something in Rose's tone suggested there was more to the story. "Town meeting tonight at the church," Rose added. "Might be a good chance for you to meet folks before school starts Monday." "Thank you. I'll certainly attend." After Rose left, Abigail unpacked her meager possessions: a few dresses, her books, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the teaching credentials that had been her salvation. She changed into her best dress, a forest green wool with modest lace at the collar, and pinned her chestnut hair into a neat bun before heading downstairs. The church was a simple white clapboard building at the end of Main Street. As Abigail approached, she could see lanterns glowing from within and hear the murmur of voices. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. First impressions mattered, especially for a woman in her position. Inside, the pews had been rearranged to create a meeting space. About 30 people had gathered, a mixture of well-dressed townspeople and more rugged individuals who must work the surrounding ranches. As Abigail entered, conversations faltered, and heads turned in her direction. A tall, distinguished gentleman with silver at his temples approached, hand extended. "Miss Decker, I presume? I'm Mayor James Whitcomb. We're delighted to have you join our community." Abigail shook his hand, grateful for the warm reception. "Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking forward to meeting my students and becoming part of Fort Bridger. Let me introduce you to our school board members." The mayor led her around the room, presenting her to various prominent citizens: the banker, the general store owner, the doctor, and his wife. Each greeted her politely, though Abigail noticed a few exchanging glances when they thought she wasn't looking. The meeting was primarily about town improvements, repairing the bridge over the creek, extending boardwalks along residential streets, planning the Harvest Festival. Abigail listened attentively, trying to absorb the rhythm and concerns of her new home. As the meeting concluded, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A man entered, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face tanned and lined from years outdoors. Unlike most of the men in the room, he wore no jacket, just a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscular forearms, dusty trousers, and worn boots. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice deep and clear. "Had a mare foaling." "Mitchell Hayes," Mayor Whitcomb said with a nod. "You missed the vote on the bridge repairs, but we carried the motion." The man Mitchell nodded, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on Abigail. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking blue against his weathered skin. He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before taking a seat at the back. After the meeting, as people lingered to socialize, Rose appeared at Abigail's side. "That's Mitch Hayes," she said in a low voice, following Abigail's gaze. "Owns the Hayes Ranch about 5 miles outside town. Widower. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's on the school board on account of donating the land for our schoolhouse." Abigail felt a flutter of nerves. "He's on the board." "I haven't met him yet. He'll come around. Man's busy this time of year, but he's fair, and that's more than can be said for some folks with his kind of holdings." As if sensing their conversation, Mitchell Hayes looked up and caught Abigail's eye. After a moment's hesitation, he made his way toward them. "Miss Decker," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Welcome to Fort Bridger. I hear you're taking on our unruly bunch of scholars." His handshake was firm but gentle, his expression unreadable. Up close, Abigail could see that his eyes weren't just blue but had flecks of gray, like the Wyoming sky before a storm. "Mr. Hayes, yes, I'm looking forward to Monday." She was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Schoolhouse is ready. Had Johnson patched the roof last week. Chimney's clean, and there's wood stacked for the stove." He spoke matter-of-factly, without embellishment. "Thank you. I appreciate the preparations." He studied her face for a moment, and Abigail had the distinct impression he was taking her measure, cataloging details. "You're older than we expected," he said finally, without malice or judgment. Rose made a small sound of disapproval, but Abigail met his gaze steadily. "I've been teaching for 20 years, Mr. Hayes. Experience has its advantages." A hint of something respect perhaps flickered in his eyes. "Indeed it does, Miss Decker. I've no doubt our children will benefit from it." He nodded to them both. "Ladies, if you'll excuse me." As he walked away, Rose shook her head. "Man speaks his mind, that's for certain." "I prefer honesty to false pleasantries," Abigail replied, though her cheeks felt warm. She'd known her age would be noted, but hadn't expected it to be mentioned so directly. When they returned to the boarding house, Rose prepared tea in the cozy parlor. "What did you think of our little town gathering?" she asked, pouring steaming liquid into delicate cups. "Everyone seems welcoming," Abigail replied diplomatically. Rose chuckled. "Most are. Some are just curious. We don't get many unmarried ladies your age coming west alone." "I suppose not." Abigail sipped her tea, considering her next words carefully. Mrs. Harmon rose. I noticed there seems to be something unspoken about my predecessor's departure. Rose's expression grew serious. Miss Perkins was young, 22, pretty as a picture. The school board hired her straight from a teaching college back east. She wasn't here 3 months before half the eligible men in the county were calling. When she accepted Harlan Moore's proposal, the board was disappointed but not surprised. She paused. They specifically asked me to mention in my letters to you that Fort Bridger was seeking a teacher dedicated to education, not matrimony. Abigail couldn't help but laugh. They needn't worry on that account. I've devoted my life to teaching. Rose studied her thoughtfully. Life has a way of surprising us, dear. Don't close any doors before you've had a peek inside. The following morning, Abigail rose early to visit the schoolhouse. The building stood on a small rise at the edge of town, a simple rectangular structure with a bell tower. Inside, she found a single large room with rows of desks facing a teacher's desk and blackboard. Bookshelves lined one wall, and a pot-bellied stove stood in the corner. She was arranging books when she heard the door open. Turning, she found Mitchell Hayes filling the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides of the frame. "Mr. Hayes," she said, startled. "Good morning." He nodded, stepping inside and removing his hat. "Thought you might need help getting settled. Brought some supplies." He indicated a crate by the door that she hadn't noticed. "That's very kind, thank you." He set the crate on her desk and began unpacking it: chalk, paper, pencils, a new broom, a tea kettle. "Student rosters in here too, 28 pupils, ages 6 to 16. "A wide range," Abigail remarked, examining the list. "I'll need to organize by ability as well as age. The Daniels boys, Luke and Mark, there behind. Father drinks, mother does her best." His voice held no judgment, just a statement of fact. "The Wilson girl, Sarah, she's smart. Reads everything she can get her hands on." Abigail looked up at him, surprised. "You know the students well." A corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Small community, Miss Decker. We look out for our own." "And do you have children in school, Mr. Hayes?" As soon as she asked, she regretted it. Rose had mentioned he was a widower. His face remained impassive. "Had a son. He'd be 17 now. Typhoid took him and my wife 8 years back." "I'm so sorry," Abigail said softly. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Life goes on. Ranch keeps me busy." He moved to the stove and checked the pipe connections. "This draws well. Johnson did a good job. You'll want to start your fire early on cold mornings." They spent the next hour preparing the schoolroom, working in companionable silence much of the time. Mitchell Hayes wasn't one for idle chatter, but when he did speak, his observations were insightful. He clearly cared about the children's education. As they finished, he paused at the door. "Town social next Saturday. Harvest dance. Tradition for the teacher to attend." "I'll be there," Abigail assured him. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good day, Miss Decker." The weekend passed quickly, and Monday arrived with the first hints of frost. Abigail reached the schoolhouse an hour early, lit the stove, and arranged her desk. As the bell rang, children began filing in fresh scrubbed faces, hair slicked down or braided, wearing their best clothes for the first day. Abigail introduced herself, established rules, and began assessing their knowledge. By lunchtime, she had grouped them by ability and set work appropriate for each level. The afternoon passed in a flurry of lessons, questions, and getting acquainted. When school dismissed, Abigail was surprised to find several mothers waiting outside. They introduced themselves and thanked her for coming to Fort Bridger. One woman, Martha Wilson, lingered after the others had gone. "Miss Decker, I wanted to personally welcome you," she said. "My Sarah is so excited to have a new teacher. She talked of nothing else all weekend." Sarah Wilson was a bright-eyed 12-year-old whose hand had shot up for every question. "She's a very intelligent girl," Abigail replied honestly, "and eager to learn." Martha beamed with pride. "She gets that from her father, God rest his soul. I wondered if you might join us for supper Friday." "Nothing fancy, but we'd be honored." The invitation touched Abigail. "I'd be delighted." The week fell into a pleasant rhythm. Abigail's students proved generally well-behaved and willing to learn. She visited several families for supper, getting to know the community and her pupils' backgrounds. The townspeople were friendly, if curious about her. Friday evening found her at the Wilson home, a modest but comfortable dwelling at the edge of town. Martha had prepared a delicious meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and apple pie. Sarah chattered excitedly about books and her ambition to become a teacher herself one day. "You've made quite an impression on our Sarah," Martha said as they washed dishes after the meal. "She's never shown such enthusiasm for school before." "She's a wonderful student," Abigail replied. "Very bright." Martha glanced toward the parlor where Sarah was showing her younger siblings a map Abigail had lent her. "Can I speak frankly, Miss Decker?" "Of course. When the board hired you, there was some talk. Some folks thought they should have found another young woman, give the unmarried men hereabouts a chance." Martha's cheeks colored. "Forgive my bluntness." "There's nothing to forgive," Abigail assured her. "I'm aware that my age and unmarried status are unusual." "It wasn't everyone," Martha continued. "Mitch Hayes spoke up strong for hiring the most qualified teacher, regardless of age or matrimonial prospects. Said Fort Bridger's children deserved the best education, not a marriage market." Abigail felt a rush of gratitude toward the taciturn rancher. "That was kind of him. Mitch isn't one for talking much, but when he does speak, folks listen. He's respected." Martha paused. "He's a good man. Lost a great deal, but it hasn't hardened his heart like it might some." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Abigail found herself thinking about Mitchell Hayes as she walked back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars. The man was an enigma, gruff yet considerate, reserved yet passionate about education. Saturday evening brought the harvest dance. The community hall was decorated with autumn leaves, corn husks, and pumpkins. A small band played lively tunes, and tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes. Abigail wore her best dress, a burgundy taffeta that she'd saved for special occasions. Rose had insisted on styling her hair, pinning the chestnut waves into an elegant knot with a few curls framing her face. "You look lovely, dear," Rose said as they entered the hall, "and not a day over 30. Abigail laughed. "You're a terrible flatterer, Rose. Not flattery if it's true. Now come, let me introduce you to some folks you haven't met." The evening was pleasant, filled with conversation, good food, and watching the dancing. Several of her students shyly approached to introduce their parents. Mayor Whitcomb asked her to dance once, a sedate waltz during which he inquired about her first week of teaching. Mitchell Hayes arrived late, wearing a clean shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He moved through the crowd, nodding to people but not lingering. Abigail lost sight of him for a while, then was surprised to find him at her elbow as she helped herself to punch. "Evening, Miss Decker," he said. "Settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been very welcoming." He glanced around the room. "First impressions of our social gatherings?" "Charming, though I notice you're not dancing." A shadow crossed his face. "Don't dance much these days." Before Abigail could respond, Dr. Fletcher and his wife joined them. The conversation turned to town news, and soon others drifted into their circle. Mitchell eventually excused himself, and Abigail didn't speak with him again that evening. As autumn deepened, Abigail found her place in Fort Bridger. Her students progressed well, and she established a small library corner in the schoolhouse with books donated by townspeople. She joined the Ladies' Aid Society and helped organize a fundraiser for new hymnals for the church. Mitchell Hayes remained on the periphery of her life, attending school board meetings where they exchanged polite greetings, occasionally crossing paths in town. Once, during a heavy rainstorm, he gave her a ride back to the boarding house in his wagon. His slicker draped over her shoulders to keep her dry while he got soaked. November arrived with the first snows. Abigail had just dismissed her students early one Friday afternoon due to a threatening blizzard when Mitchell appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Didn't know if you'd have sense to close early," he said by way of greeting, stomping snow from his boots. "Storm's coming in fast." "I was just leaving," Abigail replied, pulling on her coat and gloves. He frowned. "Can't let you walk back in this. Got my sleigh outside." The wind had picked up considerably, driving snow in horizontal sheets. Mitchell helped Abigail into the sleigh, tucking buffalo robes around her before climbing in beside her and taking up the reins. His body radiated warmth as they huddled together against the cold. "Should have closed sooner," he said, voice raised against the wind. "Weather turns quick here." "I'm learning that," she replied, teeth chattering slightly despite the robes. He glanced at her, concern evident in his expression. "You're freezing. Here." He put an arm around her, pulling her closer to his side. The gesture was practical rather than forward, but Abigail felt herself blushing nonetheless. The journey to the boarding house took longer than usual, as the horses picked their way carefully through deepening snow. By the time they arrived, Abigail could barely feel her toes. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said as he helped her down. "You've likely saved me from frostbite." He looked at the sky, brow furrowed. "Storm's worse than I thought. Not sure I should head back to the ranch tonight." "I'm certain Rose has room," Abigail suggested. "She often takes in travelers during bad weather." Inside, Rose fussed over them, insisting Mitchell stay. "Roads will be impassable by dark," she declared. "I'll make up the room at the end of the hall." She served them hot coffee and stew in the kitchen, clucking over Abigail's cold hands and Mitchell's snow-crusted clothing. After they'd warmed up, Mitchell excused himself to tend to his horses, refusing Rose's offer of her late husband's clothes. "Got spare things in my saddlebag," he said. "Always prepare for Wyoming weather." When he returned, freshly changed into dry clothes, Rose had retired to her room, leaving Abigail alone in the parlor with a book. She looked up as he entered, struck again by how he seemed to fill any space he occupied. "Storm's settling in," he reported, taking a seat across from her. "Might be here a day or two." "I hope your ranch hands can manage," Abigail said. "Got good men. They know what to do." He glanced at her book. "What are you reading?" She showed him the cover. "Emerson's Essays." "Do you read much, Mr. Hayes?" "When time allows. Mostly practical things, agricultural journals, newspapers." He paused. "My wife loved poetry. Used to read Wordsworth aloud while she mended." It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned his wife, and Abigail treaded carefully. "How long were you married?" 7 years. "Married young. I was 20, Caroline just 18. His expression softened at the memory. "Met her in Denver. Her father owned the mercantile where I bought supplies. She was shelving goods, standing on a ladder, dropped a tin of coffee beans on my head." Abigail smiled at the image. "Love at first concussion." Mitchell's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that transformed his face. "Something like that. Her father didn't approve, thought I was too rough, too poor, but Caroline had a mind of her own." "She sounds wonderful." She was. His voice held warmth rather than grief. "Brave woman, coming out here when this was barely more than a trading post. Built our ranch together, had our son Thomas." "I'm sorry you lost them," Abigail said softly. He nodded, quiet for a moment. Life doesn't always go as planned, but we endure. His gaze was steady on hers. What about you, Miss Decker? What brought you west alone at your age? The directness of his question might have offended her from another man, but Mitchell Hayes had earned the right to his curiosity by sharing his own story. My father was a professor at a small college in Philadelphia. My mother died when I was 16, and I kept house for him while completing my own education. I began teaching at the college's affiliated academy when I was 18. She twisted the ring on her right hand, a small garnet that had been her mother's. There was a young man, once a fellow teacher. We were close, but he received an opportunity to study in Europe, and I couldn't leave my father. You sacrificed your chance at marriage for filial duty, Mitchell observed. It wasn't only that, Abigail admitted. I loved teaching. Marriage would have meant giving it up. Women can't be wives and teachers, at least not back east. And now, my father passed away 6 months ago. The college had a new president who wanted younger teachers, modern methods. When I saw the advertisement for Fort Bridger, it seemed providential. Mitchell considered this. Brave, coming all this way alone, or desperate, she replied with a small smile. Both, maybe. Takes courage to face desperation head-on instead of surrendering to it. They talked late into the evening, the howling wind outside creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. Mitchell told her about building his ranch, the challenges and triumphs. Abigail shared stories from her teaching career, the students who had touched her heart. By the time they retired to their rooms, something had shifted between them, a foundation of understanding, perhaps even friendship. The blizzard raged for 2 days, leaving Fort Bridger buried in snow. Mitchell stayed at the boarding house, helping Rose clear paths and bring in firewood. When the roads were finally passable, he departed for his ranch, tipping his hat to Abigail with a newfound warmth in his gaze. School remained closed for another day as families dug out from the storm. Abigail used the time to plan lessons and grade compositions. She was midway through Sarah Wilson's essay on the Constitution when a knock came at the boarding house door. Rose answered it, and Abigail heard a child's voice, high and distressed. Moments later, Rose appeared in the parlor doorway, face grave. Miss Decker, it's young Jimmy Porter, says there's trouble at their homestead. His ma's taken sick and his pa's away trading in Cheyenne. Jimmy was a quiet 8-year-old in Abigail's class, the oldest of 4 children. Their homestead was several miles outside town, in the opposite direction from the Hayes ranch. Abigail hurried to the door where Jimmy stood, red-faced and tearful in 2 thin clothes. Jimmy, what's happened? Ma's awful sick, Miss Decker, he said, voice trembling. Been puking since yesterday. Can't keep nothing down. The baby's crying all the time and Susie and Ben are scared. Where's your father? Gone to Cheyenne with furs to trade. Won't be back till next week. Large tears spilled down his chapped cheeks. Ma said not to leave, but she fell down trying to get water and I didn't know what else to do. You did right, Jimmy, Abigail assured him, making a quick decision. Rose, can you fetch Dr. Fletcher while I go with Jimmy? His mother needs immediate help. Rose nodded. I'll send him straight out. Take my mare, she's steady in the snow, and my medical kit's under the kitchen sink. Within 20 minutes, Abigail was riding through snow-laden pines toward the Porter homestead, Jimmy clinging to her waist. The path was treacherous, drifts sometimes reaching the horse's chest, but they pressed on. When they finally reached the small log cabin, smoke barely wisping from the chimney, Abigail's heart sank. Inside, conditions were dire. Sarah Porter lay on a straw mattress, face ashen, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. The cabin was cold, the fire nearly out. A toddler cried in a makeshift cradle, while two other children, a girl of 6 and a boy of 4, huddled together under a thin blanket. "Mrs. Porter," Abigail said, kneeling beside the woman. "It's Miss Decker, Jimmy's teacher. Dr. Fletcher is on his way." Sarah Porter's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "The children," she whispered, "can't care for them." "I'm here now," Abigail assured her, squeezing her hand. "We'll manage until the doctor comes." She set to work, immediately building up the fire, heating water, preparing a broth for the sick woman while tending to the hungry children. Jimmy helped admirably, following instructions and comforting his siblings. Dr. Fletcher arrived an hour later, his examination confirming Abigail's fears. Sarah Porter had pneumonia. "She needs constant care," he said gravely. "And medicine I'll have to send from town. The children can't stay here, risk of contagion." "I'll take them to the boarding house," Abigail offered without hesitation, "and Mrs. Porter, she can't be moved in this condition." Abigail bit her lip. "I'll stay with her. Send someone to relieve me when you can." The doctor looked doubtful. "It's a lot to ask, Miss Decker. And you've no experience nursing." "I've cared for my father through several illnesses," she replied firmly. "I can manage until help arrives." After giving her instructions and medicines, Dr. Fletcher departed with the 4 Porter children, promising to return the next day. Abigail settled in for a long night, bathing Sarah's forehead, helping her sip broth, and keeping the fire stoked against the bitter cold. By morning, Sarah's fever had risen dangerously. Abigail fought her own exhaustion, praying for the doctor's return. When hoofbeats sounded outside, she rushed to the door, expecting Dr. Fletcher. Instead, she found Mitchell Hayes dismounting from his horse, leading a laden pack mule. "Mitchell." His first name slipped out in her surprise. "How did you know? Word travels," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Heard at the general store that the Porter woman was down with pneumonia and you were out here alone." He glanced around the cabin, taking in the situation with a practiced eye. "How is she?" "Worse," Abigail admitted, voice cracking with fatigue. "The fever won't break." Mitchell nodded, unpacking his saddlebags. "Brought supplies. Food, medicines, blankets." He produced a bottle. "And whiskey. Good for fever sometimes." Together they tended to Sarah, Mitchell mixing the whiskey with honey and hot water, lifting the woman's head so she could sip the concoction. He moved with surprising gentleness for a man of his size, his hands steady and sure. "You've done this before," Abigail observed. "Nursed plenty of sick ranch hands," he replied. "And Caroline at the end." He glanced at her haggard face. "You need rest, I'll watch her." "I couldn't possibly." "Not asking, Miss Decker. You're dead on your feet, no good to anyone if you collapse." Too exhausted to argue, Abigail allowed him to guide her to a chair by the fire. She meant to close her eyes only for a moment but fell into a deep sleep, waking hours later to find the cabin transformed. Mitchell had cleaned thoroughly, organized supplies, repaired a broken window shutter, and chopped enough wood to last days. Sarah Porter's fever had finally broken. She slept peacefully, her breathing still labored but less desperate. Mitchell sat beside her, spooning broth between her parched lips whenever she stirred. "You should have woken me," Abigail said, embarrassed at having slept so long. He shook his head. "Needed the rest. She's turning the corner." "Doctor will be pleased." Dr. Fletcher arrived shortly after noon, surprised and relieved by the improvement in his patient. "Whatever you two did, it worked," he said, examining Sarah. "She's not out of danger, but I'm more hopeful now." He brought news from town. The Porter children were settled at the boarding house, with Rose and other ladies taking turns minding them. School would remain closed another week due to the lingering effects of the blizzard. "I've arranged for Mrs. Jameson to come out this afternoon to nurse Mrs. Porter," the doctor added. She has experience with pneumonia cases. You can both return to town with me." Mitchell frowned. "Roads are still bad. Better if Miss Decker stays in town. I'll come back with Mrs. Jameson, make sure she's properly settled." Abigail opened her mouth to protest, but saw the sense in his suggestion. She was bone-tired, and the thought of another arduous journey through snowdrifts was daunting. "Thank you, Mitchell," she said quietly, "for everything." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Just being neighborly, Miss Decker." Back in Fort Bridger, Abigail recovered her strength while helping care for the Porter children. Jimmy attended school once classes resumed, but the younger ones remained at the boarding house, becoming temporary mascots for the town. Sarah Porter's recovery was slow but steady, with Mitchell checking on her regularly and bringing supplies from his ranch. 2 weeks after the ordeal, Sarah was well enough for her children to return home. The night before their departure, as Abigail tucked the little ones into bed, 4-year-old Ben asked innocently, "Are you going to be our new ma now, Miss Decker?" Startled, Abigail smoothed his hair. "No, sweetheart. Your mother is getting better. You'll be going home to her tomorrow." "But Jimmy said you and Mr. Hayes was taking care of us now." "We've been helping because that's what neighbors do," Abigail explained gently. "But your mother and father love you very much." Later, she mentioned the conversation to Rose, who gave her a knowing look. "Town's been talking," she said. "You and Mitch Hayes alone at that cabin for hours, then him riding out there every day since." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's absurd. We were caring for a sick woman. There was nothing improper." "Didn't say improper, said noteworthy." Rose folded linens with practiced efficiency. "Mitch hasn't shown interest in any woman since Caroline died. Plenty have tried to catch his eye over the years." "He was being charitable, nothing more," Abigail insisted, though her heart beat faster at Rose's implication. The following Sunday, Abigail sat in church, half listening to the sermon while thinking about the week ahead. Christmas was approaching, and she was planning a special program for her students. As the congregation rose for the final hymn, she noticed Mitchell sitting several pews ahead, his tall frame easy to spot. Outside after the service, as people gathered in small groups to socialize, Mitchell made his way to her side. "Miss Decker," he said with a nod. "Wanted to let you know the Porters are doing well. Took them some supplies yesterday." "That's kind of you, Mr. Hayes." She had reverted to formality in public, unsure of where they stood. He cleared his throat. "Thought you might like to see the ranch sometime." Students could benefit from learning about cattle operations. Educational trip. Several nearby conversations faltered as people pretended not to listen. "That sounds wonderful," Abigail replied, ignoring the curious glances. "Perhaps in the spring, when travel is easier." Mitchell nodded, looking almost disappointed. "Spring, then." He tipped his hat and moved away. Martha Wilson appeared at Abigail's elbow. "Mitch Hayes inviting you to his ranch," she said with a smile. "That's a first." "It's for the students," Abigail explained, feeling defensive. Martha's expression was skeptical. "Mitch has never invited the school before, and we've had 3 teachers since his wife died." December brought festive preparations to Fort Bridger. Abigail threw herself into the school Christmas program, helping her students rehearse songs and recitations. The town bustled with activity, garlands hanging from storefronts, special goods ordered for Christmas baking, plans for a community dinner. Mitchell continued to visit town regularly, often stopping by the schoolhouse with small gifts, a jar of honey from his bees, a wooden ruler he'd carved for her desk, a book of poetry he'd found among his wife's things that he thought she might enjoy. Each gesture touched Abigail deeply, but she maintained a careful distance, uncertain of his intentions and mindful of the town's watchful eyes. At 38, She had long since resigned herself to spinsterhood. The possibility that a man like Mitchell Hayes might see her as more than a colleague seemed remote. The school Christmas program was scheduled for the last day before holiday break. Parents and townspeople crowded into the schoolhouse, which had been decorated with paper chains, pine boughs, and candles. Abigail's students performed admirably, reciting poetry, singing carols, and presenting a short nativity play. Afterward, as families mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Mitchell approached her. "Fine job, Miss Decker," he said. "Children did well. Thank you. They worked very hard." He hesitated, then said in a lower voice, "I have something for you, a Christmas gift, not appropriate to give it here." Abigail felt her pulse quicken. "Perhaps you could call at the boarding house tomorrow," he nodded. "Tomorrow, then." The following afternoon, Abigail waited nervously in the parlor. Rose had tactfully announced she needed to deliver cookies to shut-ins, giving them privacy. When Mitchell arrived, he carried a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with inlaid patterns. "Made it myself," he said, presenting it to her. "Thought you could use it for letters, keepsakes." The box was exquisite, polished to a warm glow with her initials inlaid in a darker wood on the lid. "It's beautiful, Mitchell," she said, genuinely moved. "Thank you." "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a silver pendant on a delicate chain, a small open book with tiny words engraved on its pages. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The words are from Proverbs. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue," seemed fitting. Abigail was speechless, her fingers hovering over the precious gift. "I can't accept this. It should go to your family." "You are," he stopped, recalibrated. "I want you to have it, please." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something profound passed between them. Mitchell gently took the necklace and moved behind her. "May I?" she nodded, lifting her hair as he fastened the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to face him. "I have something for you as well." She retrieved a package from the side table, a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool and a book, The Cattle Industry of the American West. "The scarf I made myself," she explained. "The book came from Philadelphia. I wrote to my father's colleague at the university, asking for the most current volume on ranching methods." Mitchell ran his fingers over the scarf, then opened the book with evident interest. "This is thoughtful." "Very thoughtful. I noticed you're always reading agricultural journals. Thought you might appreciate something more comprehensive." He looked up at her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "You notice a lot about people, Abigail." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her heart flutter. "Occupational habit. Teachers observe." "And what have you observed about me?" he asked, his gaze intense. She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "That you're a man of depth. You speak little but mean what you say. You're generous without seeking recognition. You care deeply about this community, especially its children, and you've known great sorrow but haven't allowed it to embitter you." Mitchell stepped closer. "May I call on you properly, Abigail?" Not as a school board member or neighbor, but as a man interested in a woman's company. Despite herself, Abigail laughed softly. "Mitchell, I'm 38 years old. I'm 42. Are we stating facts now? You know what I mean. Women my age don't typically receive callers. Don't much care what's typical." His voice was gruff but gentle. "Care about what I want, what you might want." "And what is it you want, Mitchell Hayes?" He looked at her steadily. "To know you better, see where it leads." The simplicity of his answer disarmed her. "People will talk." "People always talk. Question is whether we listen." Christmas passed pleasantly, with Abigail joining the community dinner at the church. Mitchell sat beside her, earning raised eyebrows and knowing smiles from the townspeople. Neither of them seemed to care. Over the following weeks, their courtship progressed with the same straightforward honesty that characterized Mitchell. He called at the boarding house regularly, took Abigail on sleigh rides through the snowy landscape, and escorted her to church each Sunday. They talked for hours about books, education, ranching, their pasts, their hopes. By February, Abigail had visited the Hayes Ranch several times. It was larger than she'd imagined, a substantial main house built of sturdy logs, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, stables, barns, and corrals spread across a picturesque valley with mountains rising in the distance. Caroline designed the house, Mitchell told her as he showed her around. Wanted big windows to see the mountains. Said if she was living this far from civilization, she'd at least have a grand view. She was a wise woman, Abigail remarked, admiring the sweeping vista. She would have liked you, he said unexpectedly. Always valued education. Taught Thomas herself until he was old enough to ride to town for school. The mention of his son no longer brought shadows to his eyes, just a gentle nostalgia. It was progress, Abigail thought, to remember loved ones with fondness instead of raw grief. The ladies of Fort Bridger watched the relationship develop with interest. Most were supportive, particularly after seeing how Mitchell had changed, smiling more often, participating more actively in town affairs, even hosting a dinner at his ranch for the school board. A few, however, expressed reservations. Abigail overheard Mrs. Tanner, the banker's wife, at the general store one afternoon. "It's a shame, really. Mitchell Hayes could have his pick of younger women, women who could give him children, start a family. What's the point of marrying at her age?" The word stung more than Abigail cared to admit. She was under no illusions about her prospects for motherhood at 38. Her childbearing years were dwindling, if not already past. She had made peace with this long ago, channeling her maternal instincts into teaching. But hearing it spoken aloud in connection with Mitchell opened a wound she thought had healed. That evening, when Mitchell called at the boarding house, Abigail was unusually quiet. They sat in the parlor, Rose discreetly absent as usual during his visits. "Something troubling you," he observed. Not a question, but a statement. Abigail hesitated, then decided honesty was the foundation of whatever was growing between them. "I overheard something today that gave me pause." She related Mrs. Tanner's comments, watching his face carefully. Mitchell's expression darkened, but he remained silent until she finished. "Does that concern you?" he finally asked. "What people say, not for myself. But for you, Mitchell, she wasn't entirely wrong. I am past the age when most women have children, if you're hoping for a family." "I had a family," he interrupted. "Lost them. Spent 8 years thinking that part of my life was over." He took her hands in his. "Then you arrived, and suddenly I could imagine a different future, not a replacement for what I lost, but something new." "But children, there are children who need homes," he said firmly. "Orphans, children whose parents can't care for them. This territory is full of them. If we want a family, we'll find one that needs us." His words were so simple, so practical, yet they filled Abigail's heart with unexpected hope. "You've thought about this?" "I've thought about little else since December." He squeezed her hands. "I love you, Abigail, not despite your age or experience, but because of them. You're the woman I want beside me. The rest we'll figure out together." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "I love you too, Mitchell. I never expected to find this, not at my age, not after coming west. Life's full of surprises." He leaned forward, his kiss gentle but certain. News of their engagement in March caused a stir in Fort Bridger. Most reactions were positive. Rose wept happy tears. Martha Wilson embraced Abigail warmly after church, and Mayor Whitcomb offered hearty congratulations. Even Mrs. Tanner managed a tight smile and murmured wishes for their happiness. The school board met to discuss Abigail's teaching position. Traditionally, married women did not teach, but Fort Bridger had already broken with tradition by hiring an older, unmarried teacher. "Seems foolish to lose a good teacher just because she's getting married," Mitchell argued at the meeting, "especially when we've had such trouble keeping teachers in the past." After much debate, a compromise was reached. Abigail could continue teaching through the end of the school year, with a decision about the following year to be made later. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. They planned a June wedding after school dismissed for summer. Abigail wrote to her few remaining relatives in Philadelphia, though she expected none to make the journey west. Mitchell threw himself into preparing the ranch house, adding a sewing room for Abigail and expanding the library to accommodate her books. In late April, as wildflowers began dotting the valleys, unexpected visitors arrived in Fort Bridger. 3 children with a harried-looking woman who introduced herself as Miss Clara Simmons from the Denver Orphan Asylum. "We're transporting these children to their new homes in Idaho Territory," she explained to Dr. Fletcher, who had been summoned when the youngest child developed a cough. "But little Eddie here needs rest before we continue." Word spread quickly, and Abigail visited the hotel where they were staying, bringing books and small toys for the children. Eddie was 5, his sister Mary 7, and their half-brother James 10. Their mother had died in childbirth with Eddie, their father in a mining accident the previous year. "Poor mites," Rose said that evening as Abigail described the children. "At least they're being kept together. Most orphanages split siblings up." Mitchell listened thoughtfully. "They're headed to a farming family near Boise. That's what Miss Simmons said." The family specifically requested children old enough to help with chores. The next day, Mitchell visited the orphans himself, spending hours playing simple games with them and asking Miss Simmons detailed questions about their situation. When he returned to the boarding house that evening, his expression was resolute. "I spoke with Miss Simmons about adopting the children," he announced without preamble. Abigail stared at him. "Mitchell, we haven't even married yet. We will be by the time the paperwork's processed. I've telegraphed the orphanage in Denver. If you're willing, we could give these children a home, Abigail. A real home, not a farm needing extra hands." "But this is so sudden. Shouldn't we discuss such a decision carefully?" "Sometimes you know something's right," he said simply. "I looked at those children and saw our family. But if you're not ready—" Abigail thought of the children's solemn-faced James, quiet Mary with her thumb-sucking habit, little Eddie with his persistent cough. "They need more than a farm needing workers," she agreed slowly. "They need parents who will love them. We can be those parents." Mitchell's eyes held hers, full of certainty. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Dr. Fletcher pronounced Eddie well enough to travel but suggested the children remain in Fort Bridger until summer. Miss Simmons, eager to continue to Idaho with her other charges, was pleased to leave the 3 siblings in the temporary custody of Mitchell and Abigail, with formal adoption proceedings to follow. Their wedding plans accelerated. Instead of June, they would marry in May, as soon as the necessary arrangements could be made. The town rallied around them. Rose and the Ladies' Society sewed Abigail a wedding dress. The general store ordered special delicacies from Cheyenne, and Mayor Whitcomb offered the community hall for the reception. The children stayed at the boarding house with Abigail, quickly adapting to their new circumstances. James, initially wary, warmed to Mitchell's patient instruction in ranch skills. Mary attached herself to Abigail, following her around the schoolhouse after classes. Eddie blossomed with proper care, his cough disappearing as spring progressed. Not everyone approved of their unorthodox family in formation. Mrs. Tanner made pointed remarks about the impropriety of unmarried people taking in children. The Reverend Jenkins expressed concerns about the rushed wedding. Even Rose gently suggested they might be taking on too much too quickly. 2 days before the wedding, Abigail found Mitchell on the porch of the boarding house, staring at the distant mountains. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "Second thoughts?" she asked quietly. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Not about you, never about you. But wonder sometimes if I'm doing right by those children, by you, taking on so much at once." Abigail squeezed his hand. "I had the same fears. But then I watch you with James, teaching him to whittle, or see Mary's face when you promised her a pony of her own, or hear Eddie giggling when you toss him in the air." Mitchell smiled faintly. "They're good children." "And you're already a good father to them," she said simply. "We're creating something beautiful, Mitchell. Unconventional, perhaps, but beautiful." Inside, they could hear the children laughing with Rose, the domestic sounds of dinner preparation, life continuing in its ordinary, miraculous way. "8 months ago I was alone," Mitchell said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thought I'd stay that way. Now I'm about to have a wife and 3 children." "Life's full of surprises," Abigail echoed his earlier words, resting her head against his shoulder as the setting sun painted the mountains gold. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Abigail dressed in her new gown, cream-colored silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. Rose arranged her hair, weaving wildflowers through the chestnut waves. "You make a beautiful bride, Abigail," Rose said, blinking back tears. "At any age." The children were equally excited. Mary wore a new blue dress and proudly carried a basket of flowers. James, solemn in his best clothes, would carry the rings. Eddie, still too young for formal responsibilities, would simply walk with his siblings, though he insisted on wearing a small bow tie like Mitchell's. The ceremony took place in the church, filled to capacity with townspeople. As Abigail walked down the aisle, Mitchell waiting at the altar with the children beside him, she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was infinitely more wonderful than anything she could have planned. Their vows were traditional but heartfelt. When the Reverend Jenkins pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell's kiss was gentle but full of promise. The children cheered, Eddie jumping up and down in excitement, causing ripples of affectionate laughter through the congregation. The reception was joyous, tables laden with food, music from local musicians, dancing that continued well into the evening. Even Mrs. Tanner unbent enough to congratulate them sincerely. As dusk fell, Mitchell loaded his new family into the wagon for the journey to the ranch, their home now. The children, exhausted from excitement, fell asleep against each other in the back, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" Mitchell asked, his arm around Abigail as he guided the horses with his free hand. "Deliriously so, Mr. Hayes." She nestled against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Though I admit to being a bit nervous about my new responsibilities, 3 children and a ranch are quite different from a classroom. We'll learn together," he assured her, "one day at a time." The ranch house welcomed them with lanterns glowing in the windows. Mitchell's foreman had ridden ahead to prepare for their arrival. Inside, everything was ready, fires lit, beds made, a simple supper waiting. After settling the drowsy children in their new rooms, Mitchell and Abigail stood in the main room, finally alone as husband and wife. "Welcome home," he said softly, taking her in his arms. Their kiss deepened, years of solitude dissolving into newfound intimacy. When they finally parted, both breathless, Abigail touched his face wonderingly. They said I was too old to bear children, she whispered, and here we are with 3 already. Mitchell's smile was tender. What matters isn't how children come to us, but that we love them once they're here. The adjustment to family life brought challenges and joys in equal measure. James initially tested boundaries, uncertain of his place in this new arrangement. Mary wet the bed for the first few weeks, anxious about another upheaval. Eddie had nightmares, calling for a mother long gone. Abigail and Mitchell weathered these storms together, establishing routines, offering reassurance, building trust day by day. Mitchell taught James ranching skills, patiently repeating lessons when frustration mounted. Abigail read to Mary each night, gradually replacing thumb-sucking with stories. They took turns comforting Eddie after nightmares, until the bad dreams came less frequently. School continued through May, with the children joining Abigail's class. The other students accepted them readily, curiosity about the teacher's sudden family quickly giving way to normal childhood interactions. By summer's end, the formal adoption papers arrived from Denver, making official what their hearts already knew. They celebrated with a picnic by the creek that ran through the ranch property, the children shrieking with laughter as Mitchell taught them to skip stones across the water. That night, after the children were asleep, Abigail sat on the porch with Mitchell, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. "After Caroline and Thomas died, I couldn't imagine any life worth living," he admitted. "Just existed, did what needed doing." Then one day, this prim Eastern schoolmarm walked into a town meeting, looking both terrified and determined, and something woke up inside me. Abigail laughed softly. "I was terrified, convinced everyone would take one look at me and send me straight back east. Instead, you found a family." "We found each other," she corrected, taking his hand, "all of us finding what we needed." The years that followed brought changes to Fort Bridger and to the Hayes family. The town grew as the railroad expanded, bringing new settlers and opportunities. The school added a second teacher, allowing Abigail to continue part-time while managing her household. The children thrived. James, at 16, became Mitchell's right hand on the ranch, showing a natural talent for working with horses. Mary excelled in school, her quiet nature blossoming into thoughtful confidence. Eddie grew sturdy and strong, his early health concerns long forgotten as he raced across the ranch with boundless energy. In their 5th year of marriage, an unexpected blessing arrived. The local doctor had recently taken on a young assistant doctor. Williams, who examined Abigail when she experienced persistent fatigue and nausea. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his expression carefully neutral, "I believe you're expecting a child." At 43, Abigail had long since abandoned any thought of bearing children. The news left her shocked, joyful, and terrified in equal measure. Mitchell's reaction was immediate and wholehearted. "A miracle," he declared, gathering her close. "Another child to love." They told the older children together, uncertain of their response. James, now 15, looked stunned but pleased. Mary, 12, was ecstatic at the prospect of a baby. Eddie, 10, had practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether it would cry all night like the Johnsons' new baby. The pregnancy progressed without major complications, though Dr. Williams monitored Abigail carefully due to her age. The town buzzed with the news, most expressing delight, though Mrs. Tanner couldn't resist remarking that it was quite unusual at her age and potentially dangerous. In the spring, Abigail gave birth to a son, healthy and strong despite being somewhat small. They named him Thomas William Hayes, Thomas for Mitchell's first son, William for Abigail's father. "He's perfect," Mitchell whispered, holding his newborn son while the older children crowded around to see their baby brother. Our family's complete now. Abigail, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband and children, James tall and serious, Mary gentle and curious, Eddie protective and proud, and now tiny Thomas, all of them bound together by love rather than blood. "They said I was too old to bear children," she murmured, reaching for Mitchell's hand. "But I think what they meant was I was too old for the conventional path, and they were right." Mitchell smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "Our path's been anything but conventional." "And all the better for it," Abigail replied, her heart full as she surveyed the family they had built together, a family formed not through traditional expectations, but through open hearts willing to love the children who needed them, and eventually blessed with one more miracle to cherish. As baby Thomas grew alongside his older siblings, the Hayes Ranch became known throughout the territory, not only for its fine horses and cattle, but for the family that embodied the true spirit of the West: resilience, adaptation, and the courage to create a future limited only by the size of one's heart. On Thomas's 5th birthday, as family and friends gathered to celebrate, Abigail found Mitchell watching their children, James, now 20, preparing for college in Denver, Mary, 17, teaching the younger children at the Fort Bridger School, Eddie, 15, showing a talent for veterinary medicine, and Thomas, energetic and curious, the bridge between two chapters of their lives. "Any regrets?" she asked softly, slipping her hand into his. Mitchell turned to her, the love of a decade shining in his eyes. "Not one," he answered, drawing her close. "Every day proves we made the right choice to love the ones who needed us, and to trust that love would be enough." And in the golden light of a Wyoming sunset, surrounded by the family they had built together, it was more than enough. It was everything.